My electric bill hit $1,537, and the same day, Karen rolled up to the HOA clubhouse in a brand new Range Rover with a bow on the hood, like she'd just won the damn lottery. 3 neighbors had their power flicker all weekend, and she was out front sipping champagne by her second pool like it was the Beverly Hills Hotel. That's the moment I knew. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't about infrastructure. You think you know where this is going? Trust me, whatever you're imagining, it doesn't even come close. But hey, drop your guess in the comments. I'll wait. Alright, let's rewind. I grew up in this neighborhood. Not in the fancy part where all the houses look like they're auditioning for a reality show, but in the quiet, older section near the tree line, where you could still hear frogs at night and neighbors actually waved when you passed by. My dad bought that house in the early 80s when interest rates were a nightmare and nobody had even heard of HOA boards with dress codes for garbage bins. He raised me there with calloused hands, a shed full of tools, and the kind of pride in his lawn that bordered on competitive. He used to say, "One day this house will be yours, Alex. Don't let anyone mess with it. Not the banks, and not the government, not anyone." Back then, I thought he meant taxes. Turns out I was thinking too small. After he passed, the house sat quiet for a while. I lived in the city, bounced between contracts and tech gigs, trying to get through the days without losing my mind in traffic or cubicle lighting. My wife had passed a few years earlier. Car accident on I-84. Just like that. Left me and our daughter, Lily, spinning. She was only 8 back then. She's 12 now, smarter than me, and not shy about reminding me of it. The plan wasn't even really a plan. I just needed a break. Something real? So I took a remote consulting job, packed up our life, and brought Lily back to the house I grew up in. I figured she could use some stillness. Maybe I could too. The place had aged. It creaked more than I remembered, the fence leaned like it had opinions, and the roof had survived one too many Oregon winters. But it was solid, built with stubborn wood and my dad's bare hands. The backyard still smelled like cedar. The attic still had his old shortwave radios stacked next to dusty National Geographics and a box labeled for Alex one day. The first week back, I was on the porch fixing the screen door when Karen Prentice pulled up in a white BMW. She got out in a blazer and heels like she was late for a board meeting even though it was a weekday and no one else was around. She introduced herself with that tight HOA smile, bright teeth, zero warmth, said she was the president of the South Haven Ridge Homeowners Association, which apparently my dad had opted into years ago when they expanded the district lines. Back then it seemed harmless. Lower trash fees, communal snow plowing, that kind of thing. Karen had the kind of energy that makes you feel like you're being sized up while she's complimenting your lawn. She handed me a welcome packet the thickness of a phone book, smiled like a flight attendant during turbulence, and said, "We're just so excited to have another full-time resident on this street. It's been so transient." I thanked her, took the packet, and forgot about it until I accidentally dropped it 2 days later, and it exploded into a pile of printed bylaws, architectural guidelines, vendor lists, and a glossy brochure for something called ClearVolt Energy Partnership. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Looked like a PR thing some sustainable energy supplier HOA had signed with. Whatever, I just wanted to hook up the internet and get Lily's school login working. The next morning, I noticed a laminated sign staked into my yard. South Haven Ridge, proudly powered by ClearVolt. Your neighborhood, your energy, your future. I didn't even see who put it there, just showed up like a mushroom. I figured maybe it was a neighborhood-wide contract thing. Not uncommon. I've done enough utility consulting to know how those deals work. HOA negotiates bulk pricing, everyone gets locked into the same supplier, maybe saves a few bucks, maybe not. Lily joked that the logo looked like it was designed by someone who had never seen a lightning bolt. I pulled the stake out, set it by the trash, and moved on. The first couple of months were uneventful. Lily adjusted surprisingly well. She liked the quiet. We built a chicken coop together. Well, she designed it, and I mostly hit my thumb with a hammer. I started working on fixing up the place bit by bit. New gutters, fresh paint, finally replaced that weird gurgling sound in the bathroom sink. It was good, honest work, the kind that tired you out the right way. I got my first electric bill toward the end of that month. It was high, higher than I remembered, but I hadn't lived here in a while. I figured maybe rates had gone up. Everything else had. Milk, plywood, even dumb things like printer ink. I paid it and moved on. The second month, it went up again. And then the third month, it jumped by almost 30%. same usage, same routine. I started noticing little things, like how the HOA emails now had branded footers from ClearVault, or how Karen always mentioned our infrastructure improvements during community notices, even though no one could point to a single improvement besides new landscaping around the clubhouse fountain. Still, I wasn't raising hell. Not yet. I figured maybe I was missing something. Maybe there was some work going on behind the scenes. I mean, that's what HOAs do, right? Hide the sausage. Maybe they were laying underground cables or replacing something I didn't see. I wasn't trying to be the angry guy with a clipboard and a conspiracy theory. I just wanted to understand what the hell I was paying for. Besides, I had other things to focus on. Lily's science fair, fixing the porch railing, trying to figure out how to actually grow tomatoes in that stubborn backyard soil. Life was full, messy, but good. It wasn't until the bill crossed the $1,000 line that I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore, and when I looked up from that piece of paper and saw Karen, in her red heels, stepping out of a brand new Range Rover like she was shooting a Lexus commercial in our driveway, smiling, waving, pretending none of this was weird, that's when it clicked. Something was off. I didn't know what yet, but I was about to find out. And if you're thinking this is just another HOA nightmare story about power-hungry Karens and annoying bylaws, buckle up. You have no idea how deep this thing goes. But hey, if you think you've got a guess, drop it in the comments. Let's see how close you get. It started with a letter. Not one of those flimsy postcards with happy little graphics, but a thick white envelope, HOA letterhead, bold red stamp across the front. Important utility notice. Inside was a formal announcement from Karen. Well, not her directly, of course, from the Office of Community Energy Management, which was just a fancy title she invented for herself, apparently. It said there would be a temporary adjustment to electric rates in our community due to infrastructure modernization. That phrase came up a lot, like a buzzword someone overused in a pitch deck. They made it sound urgent. Like if we didn't raise rates now, the grid might collapse and we'd all be rubbing sticks together by next winter. The letter said the increase was necessary to support a future-focused energy solution tailored to the evolving demands of our progressive community. Whatever the hell that meant. Now, like I said, I'm not new to this world. I worked in utilities for over a decade, consulted on grid management systems, helped design smart metering for half a dozen municipalities. I know what infrastructure upgrades look like. I also know when someone's slapping buzzwords on a bill to pad their bottom line. Still, I didn't jump straight to suspicion. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I thought, okay, maybe they're upgrading transformers, maybe they're replacing cabling, integrating solar, battery storage, something. So I looked around, drove through the neighborhood. Nothing, not a single crew. No orange cones, no contractor trucks, not even a caution sign zip-tied to a street lamp. The only thing I saw that looked remotely modernized was the new tile Karen had just installed around the community pool. White quartz, imported. I only knew that because she was bragging about it to someone on speakerphone in the clubhouse parking lot while I was walking past with Lily. A few days later, I called the number listed on the notice, got voicemail, professional tone, automated options, but nothing that led to a human. I left a message, no response, so I emailed. I kept it polite, told them I'd noticed the rate increase, understood the need for improvements, but asked if there was a breakdown of the work being done. Timeline, scope, contractor info, any community review documents. I didn't hear back for a week. Then, instead of an answer, I got a reply from the HOA board itself, a form email. Thank you for your inquiry. Due to high volume, individual questions may not receive a direct response. Please refer to the quarterly newsletter for ongoing project updates. That was it. Cold as ice, and just like that, something shifted. That was the first moment I felt it. That subtle little flex of authority, that quiet warning, you don't get to ask questions, and it wasn't just me. I ran into an older guy from 3 doors down, Tony, real nice, always out pruning his shrubs. I casually brought up the letter and he just sort of shrugged and said, "Yeah, not thrilled about it, but they say it's necessary, I don't know." Then he looked over both shoulders like he'd just shared state secrets, like just talking about it too loud might get him written up. That was the moment the air got weird. The letter wasn't just an increase, it was a move, a test, like they were seeing who'd flinch, who'd question, and who'd just keep paying without asking too many questions. And I'll be honest, I almost let it go. Life was busy. Work was picking up. Lily had soccer practice, the roof still needed patching, and I had enough on my plate without turning into the neighborhood whistleblower. But something about the silence, about how clean and rehearsed it all felt, just didn't sit right. That envelope didn't just raise my rate, it raised my guard. The rate never went back down. Every time I checked my bill, it felt like a slap. First a few extra bucks, then a chunk, then a jump big enough to make my stomach tighten. And every single month, that word, temporary. I started keeping a file, printed copies of every notice, every breakdown, every line item. The bills weren't just high. They were suspiciously high, like they were charging premium rates for some invisible VIP energy I didn't ask for. But here's the thing that really got under my skin. They never said what they were fixing. Not once. There were no updates, no project status, no photos, no scheduled work, nothing. The infrastructure we were supposedly paying for remained as invisible as ever. I asked again, sent another email. No answer. This time, I CC'd every board member listed in the HOA portal. No response. A few days later, my mailbox had a bright yellow flyer tucked inside from the HOA reminding everyone about the new Civic Unity policy, which was apparently some feel-good rebranding of the Community Code of Conduct. It emphasized respectful discourse and warned against unverified information spreading through unofficial channels. Cute. That's when I noticed the shift. It started subtle. The HOA newsletter stopped arriving in my inbox. The online portal suddenly said my login was unauthorized. When I reached out to the support contact, the email bounced back as undeliverable. One day, I was walking Lily back from her friend's house when we passed the community clubhouse. Karen was there with 2 other board members sipping something out of stemless wine glasses in the middle of the afternoon. She saw me, didn't smile, just gave a tight nod and turned away mid-sentence. The other 2 followed suit like they were part of some weird synchronized contempt team. A few mornings later, I woke up and the power was out. Whole house dark. Checked the breaker. Nothing. Waited, thinking maybe it was a local outage, but the houses across the street were lit up like nothing happened. Called the utility hotline listed on our ClearVolt statements. Got a chipper voice telling me, looks like your address is flagged for temporary interruption due to equipment servicing in your zone. Except no one else in my zone lost power, and no one serviced anything. It came back later that evening, just in time for Karen's email to hit my inbox. Apparently, I'd been randomly selected to participate in a ClearVolt pilot program testing grid stability under intermittent demand. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. That's how they framed it, like I should be grateful they were experimenting on me without warning. After that, it started piling up. The new community beautification team came by and trimmed the hedges along my front walk without asking. Then they sent me a bill. A $108 voluntary improvement charge. They didn't just add it to my HOA dues, they tacked it directly onto my next electric bill, like they were merging the two into one giant payment I couldn't fight. When I contested it, I got an email from someone I'd never heard of, assistant coordinator for member engagement. It said, "We understand that transitions can be challenging, but community progress requires occasional discomfort." I wasn't sure if they were managing a neighborhood or writing a cult newsletter. Then came the worst one. I got home from the store one afternoon and found a red envelope taped to my front door. Not mailed. Taped. Inside was a notice titled Behavioral Concern Review. Apparently, I'd violated Section 4.2b of the HOA Charter by engaging in hostile questioning of community leadership. That was the actual phrase. Hostile questioning. I wasn't swearing. I wasn't protesting. I wasn't picketing. I asked about a rate increase. That's it. They gave me 30 days to restore compliance or face administrative review. No one explained what that meant. Not in writing, not when I asked. The next morning, I noticed someone had taken down the old wooden sign I put by the mailbox, the one my dad carved when I was a kid. It just said West in burnt-in lettering, simple and clean. Gone. In its place was a laminated placard with the HOA logo and a QR code linking to the Community Directory Initiative, like they were trying to erase everything that didn't come stamped and approved. And still, I tried to play it cool. I thought maybe if I showed up to the next board meeting, asked calmly, kept my tone level, someone would listen. Maybe one of them wasn't totally in Karen's pocket. Maybe there was someone reasonable on the inside who just didn't realize how out of hand it had gotten. So I went. It was held at the clubhouse, which now had 2 ClearVolt banners outside and a new touchscreen check-in kiosk that greeted me with a little chime and a spinning logo animation that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage. Karen sat dead center at the board table wearing a cream blazer and a pin that said, "Future is bright." When I stepped up to speak, she didn't even look up from her tablet. I asked about the rates again. Asked what work was being done. Asked who approved the pilot programs and where the spending reports were. She tapped on her tablet, said, "Mr. West, your concerns have been noted and will be evaluated by the appropriate subcommittee." I asked which subcommittee. She said, "That information is privileged." I laughed, and that's when she smiled, like she was waiting for me to do exactly that. "This meeting is concluded," she said, and just like that, the room emptied. No vote, no discussion. They just got up and left. I stood there for a minute in that fluorescent-lit room, half expecting someone to come back and tell me it was all a big misunderstanding. But no one came. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't mismanagement. This was intentional. And they weren't done. Not even close. I still believed I could fix it. That's probably the dumbest part of all this. Not that I stood up to them, not that I poked the bear, but that I really, truly thought I could walk this thing back if I just followed the right steps. Used the system. Stayed calm. You grow up in a country where they teach you that processes matter. File the right form, send the right letter, talk to the right person. Eventually, someone listens. That's what I believed. So I started with the basics. I filed a formal request under the HOA's own dispute policy. That meant digging through about 40 pages of dense PDFs to find the right subsection, typing up a detailed letter, attaching copies of my bills, highlighting the timeline of rate increases, quoting their own bylaws about fiscal transparency. I even threw in the line about how my concerns aligned with the HOA's mission of community-first accountability. I printed the whole packet, slid it into an envelope, and walked it to the office myself. I handed it to a kid who looked barely old enough to shave. He took it like it was a sandwich order and promised someone would get back to me. No one did. After a week, I sent a follow-up email, attached the same documents. Got one of those auto-replies that said the board would review submissions on a quarterly basis. Real convenient. They were charging me monthly, but they only listened every 3 months. That's when I called a lawyer. Nothing dramatic, just a consultation. I wasn't suing anyone. I just needed to know where I stood. Guy's name was Ruben. Mid-40s, quiet voice, probably had a collection of vintage watches and a dog that slept in the front seat of his truck. He read everything I sent him and asked one question. "Do they publish vendor contracts?" I told him no. He nodded like he'd heard that answer 100 times before. Legally, it was a mess. The HOA had just enough insulation between themselves and ClearVolt that pinning them to anything specific was going to be like boxing a ghost. The contract was private. The rates were set per agreement with the board, and unless I had hard evidence of financial misconduct, I couldn't force a public audit. Still, Ruben suggested I file a complaint with the state regulatory office. Oregon had a division for that. I filled out the forms, submitted everything online. Then I waited. While I waited, I tried getting the neighbors involved. I went door to door, which is something I never thought I'd do in my life. Not to sell candy, not to talk politics, definitely not to talk kilowatt hours, but I figured maybe if I could show them the pattern, my bills, the timeline, the lack of answers, someone else might have noticed the same thing. Maybe we could push back together. Some folks were polite but distant, nodded, listened, took the printouts I brought and said they'd look into it. Some clearly didn't want any part of it. One guy, Phil, actually said, "Look, man, I just don't want to make waves. I got a refi going through. I can't have trouble with the board." That hit harder than I expected. It was like realizing everyone's living in a glass house and too scared to knock on the window, but not everyone shut the door. One neighbor, Janet, a retired elementary school teacher who lived on the far end of the loop, invited me in. She had a stack of bills spread out on her dining table already. Said she'd been tracking hers since the first spike, even had handwritten notes with dates and dollar amounts. When I told her about my power test cycle, she laughed so hard she choked on her tea. We compared notes. Patterns started to emerge, but the more we talked, the clearer it became. They'd designed this whole thing to seem legit from just far enough away. Nothing overtly illegal, nothing that screamed fraud, just layers of murkiness hidden behind vague policy language and glossy branding. Still, I kept at it. I reached out to the city council, left voicemails, sent emails. No one responded. HOA matters were private, they said. I called the Oregon Public Utility Commission. They said since ClearVolt wasn't a public utility because it was operating under a private vendor contract, they had limited authority. I actually laughed. I asked the guy on the phone, so what does someone do when their private power company is robbing them with the blessing of their HOA? He said, "Sir, we recommend you speak to your board leadership or legal counsel." Full circle. At one point, I even contacted a local consumer affairs reporter. I didn't name names, just asked if they'd ever heard of a neighborhood energy provider hiking rates indefinitely under the guise of modernization, with no transparency. They were interested, until I told them the HOA name. Then suddenly they were fully booked with other investigations. Everything I tried felt like running up a muddy hill, and the higher I got, the slicker it got. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to talk. I kept hearing the same phrase over and over. It's complicated. But here's the thing. Complicated doesn't mean impossible. Complicated just means hidden. And hidden things tend to rot in the dark. I didn't know what the rot was yet, but I was starting to smell it. And still, part of me hoped maybe Karen would wake up one day and realize this was too much. Maybe someone on the board would get cold feet. Maybe a good faith conversation could still happen. Maybe if I just kept showing up. Spoiler, I was wrong, but that part comes later. I was just about ready to give up. I mean, I wouldn't admit that out loud, not to Lily, not even to myself, but something in me was folding, quietly, like the last page of a book you never wanted to finish. I'd done the paperwork, knocked on doors, spoke to lawyers, tried to get press. Nobody wanted to bite. The HOA was too slick. Everything they did had this legal Teflon coating. Nothing stuck. I started wondering if I was just wrong. Maybe I was reading into it too much. Maybe I'd been staring at my bills for so long that I was inventing patterns. Maybe Karen wasn't the puppet master I made her out to be. Maybe she was just another person doing a terrible job with way too much authority. That little voice, that one that tells you to just shut up and pay your bills like everyone else, started getting louder. Then Janet called. She said it quiet, almost like she was afraid someone might be listening through the phone. "You're going to want to see this," she said. She wouldn't explain more, just told me to come by. I got there and she met me at the door with a manila folder in her hand, like she'd been pacing with it all day. She led me to her kitchen, sat me down, and laid it out in front of me. It was just a printout from the county property records website. One of those dry spreadsheets with tax parcels, ownership transfers, sale histories, nothing fancy. But right there, in a section marked Vendor Service Liens, was a name I'd never seen before, Rosemont Utility Holding, LLC. I looked up. Janet was watching me, eyes sharp. "That's not ClearVolt," I said. She nodded. We started digging. Deep. Turns out Rosemont wasn't just some middleman. It was the parent company that owned ClearVolt. But here's the kicker. They weren't a utility provider at all. They were a real estate holding firm, focused on what their own website proudly called synergistic residential monetization, which is a fancy way of saying they buy things near neighborhoods and figure out how to squeeze them for every cent. That wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was when Janet found the board meeting notes from 18 months back. Not the ones posted online, the ones archived in the digital HOA portal. She still had access somehow from an old credentials list they forgot to update after she left a committee. In the minutes, buried 3 pages down, was a vote, unanimous according to the document, to approve an exclusive infrastructure development agreement with Rosemont Utility Holding, LLC. The person who motioned for the vote? Karen Prentice. But it wasn't just her name on the motion. Next to it was a notation. Shareholder disclosure acknowledged and waived by board. That phrase made my skin crawl. We searched the public filings for Rosemont's corporate registry. Oregon's Secretary of State site had a full PDF. The registered agent was a Portland-based real estate lawyer, but listed under member interests. Karen. Full name. Address matched hers. 23% ownership, 23%. She wasn't just approving deals, she owned the company we were all being forced to buy energy from. She was hiking our bills to line her own pockets, and she had the board sign off on it under a waiver buried in meeting minutes no one ever read. That's when everything went silent in the room. You could hear the fridge humming behind us and nothing else. Janet looked at me. I looked back at her. She's not just corrupt, I said. She's profiting off her own HOA decisions. That moment, it hit me like a freight train. I hadn't just been arguing with some overzealous volunteer drunk on power. I'd been going up against a woman running her own little empire right under everyone's noses. Quiet, clean, and technically, on paper, legal. She hadn't just gamed the system. She'd built a side hustle out of it. Right there, inside the neighborhood. She used HOA votes to sign sweetheart deals with a company she owned, then used those contracts to justify rate increases we couldn't fight. And no one knew because no one was looking. Until now. That folder in Janet's kitchen wasn't just paperwork. It was dynamite, and in that moment, everything changed. The fear, the doubt, the slow grind of dead ends. I felt it all burn away, replaced by something else. I wasn't crazy, I was right, and Karen had made a mistake. She left a trail, and I was gonna follow it. I didn't sleep much that night. You ever have one of those moments where your brain just won't shut off? Like your body's exhausted, but your mind's doing laps at full speed. That was me. Staring at the ceiling, Janet's folder on the table beside me, Lily snoring softly in the next room. It all made sense now. Every weird power interruption, every evasive email, every empty promise of temporary increases. She'd rigged the whole thing. Karen wasn't just padding the books, she was the books. And Clearvolt? That was just the showroom window. The real cash register rang under the name Rosemont Utility Holding LLC, and Karen owned the key. But knowing something and proving it? Two very different beasts. And in a system as tight and self-protecting as an HOA, you can't just shout gotcha and expect the walls to fall down. I needed a plan, a real one, and this time, no emails, no polite requests, no hopeful speeches at board meetings. This needed to be chess, not checkers. So I did what I always do when I need clarity. I got out of the house. Drove. I ended up back at my dad's old tool shed behind the property. It still smelled like oil and cedar shavings, same as it did when I was 10. I sat on his old stool and started sketching things out in a notebook, step by step. What we knew, what we needed, where the cracks were. First crack, the conflict of interest. Karen hadn't just violated ethical lines, she'd leapt over them, waving a checkbook. But to make it stick, I needed more than a name on a registry. I needed transactional proof. Something that tied HOA funds directly to Rosemont in a way no amount of legal jargon could spin. And I had a hunch where to find it. The HOA's financial reports. Not the edited versions they mailed out once a quarter with cartoon graphics and vague pie charts, but the real ledgers. The ones with bank statements, contractor invoices, vendor payments. The stuff they kept on the internal portal, locked behind logins and board access only, which meant I needed help. I called Janet. She picked up fast, like she'd been waiting. I told her what I was thinking. She didn't hesitate, said she still had an old tablet from her time on the HOA Beautification Committee, said it still remembered her login. We met later that night. Her porch, 2 cups of lukewarm coffee, and that beat-up tablet glowing in the dark like it was holding state secrets. It took us 3 hours of digging, but eventually, buried deep in a folder marked Legacy Project Files, we found it. Invoices. Dozens of them. Payments issued from the HOA General Fund directly to Rosemont Utility Holding LLC. Not Clearvolt. Not a subcontractor. Rosemont, and not for utilities. Some were labeled advisory fees, others consulting retainers, and one actually said leadership equity incentives. Whatever that meant, it sure as hell didn't sound like new transformers or upgraded power lines. Janet looked at me, eyes wide. This is it. She was right, but it still wasn't enough. Because HOA boards, especially the dirty ones, they know how to play defense. They'll say the votes were legal, the agreement's transparent, the waivers signed. I could show the conflict, sure, but they'd spin it as approved development partnerships. I needed someone outside the HOA, someone with teeth. That's when I thought about Ruben again, my lawyer. I'd only hired him for a consult, but something about the way he'd handled himself stuck with me. The guy didn't flinch. He had that vibe, like he knew things before you said them out loud. So I called him, asked if he'd take a closer look. He agreed, but warned me up front. If this is what you think it is, it's gonna rattle cages. Be ready for pushback. I told him I'd been getting pushback since the first week I moved in. He had me send over everything: Janet's screenshots, the property registry PDFs, the meeting minutes, the invoices. 2 days later, he called me back. Said 4 words that I'll never forget. She left a paper trail. Apparently, one of the documents we found, the one labeled Equity Incentive Agreement, included Karen's digital signature along with a clause that basically said Rosemont would kick back a percentage of its neighborhood revenue to initial facilitators as long as they maintained contractual oversight influence. In plain English, she was getting a monthly cut, so now we had motive, we had method, we had proof, but Ruben said if I wanted to make this stick, I needed one more thing: visibility. He said, you can go after her through legal channels, but if she knows it's coming, she'll bury it. What you need is exposure, public pressure, noise. He was right. If I filed quietly, she'd just twist it, get ahead of it, control the narrative. But if I went loud and timed it right, we could blow the whole thing wide open before she even saw it coming. So that was the plan. Build the case, verify every document, map the money, keep it airtight. Then flip the lights on, expose her, publicly. But not yet. First, we needed to make sure every single domino was in place, because when we knocked the first one down, it had to bring the whole house with it. It started small, just a little tremor under the surface. A shift. We printed everything. I mean everything. Janet and I built a full binder, organized, labeled, cross-referenced. Ruben reviewed every page twice. We had invoices, corporate filings, meeting minutes, ownership disclosures, digital signatures. A paper trail so tight it squeaked. Then we made copies. I dropped off one to Ruben's office. Janet mailed one to the county's HOA Oversight Committee. I emailed another, anonymously, to a local investigative reporter I knew had a reputation for chasing HOA corruption like it was his full-time job. He didn't respond right away, but I could see from the open tracker that the files had been clicked. And then I waited. Nothing happened the first few days. I started wondering if I'd gotten too confident, if maybe Karen had paid someone off, or if the paper trail wasn't as ironclad as I thought. Maybe it'd all just disappear quietly like everything else around here. Then the power shut off again, but this time, not just at my house. The whole north end of the community went dark. I got texts from neighbors, Tony, the kid from the next block, even Janet's cousin who lived over by the tennis courts, and guess what? Only houses outside of the board members' cul-de-sac were affected. Again, and what shows up the very next morning? A new ClearVolt pilot initiative flyer shoved into our doors claiming the outage was part of a rolling optimization sequence. Rolling optimization, my ass. I knew what it was. It was Karen trying to reassert control, a reminder that no matter how mad we got, she still had her hands on the switch. I didn't back off. I pushed harder. With Ruben's help, I submitted a formal conflict of interest claim to the state, not just through HOA channels, but through the business and utility regulatory boards. We even got a copy notarized and delivered by courier to the city clerk's office so there'd be a paper trail they couldn't erase. And then we did the one thing Karen couldn't prepare for. We showed up in numbers. Janet rallied 3 of her friends. I pulled in Tony and a guy from down by the dog park who turned out to be a former accountant. We had 11 people show up at the next HOA board meeting. 11 pissed-off, overbilled residents, all with binders in hand. We didn't cause a scene, we didn't shout, we just waited for the public comments section. I went first, laid it out calmly, clearly. I didn't accuse, I presented. I asked why board-authorized payments were going to a company owned by Karen. I asked why those transactions weren't disclosed in the quarterly summaries. I asked whether the other board members were aware of the ownership conflict before they voted on the agreements. Karen didn't even look up at me. She just said, "This isn't the appropriate forum for financial grievances." But something in her voice cracked, a half-beat pause, just long enough for everyone in that room to feel it. After the meeting, one of the newer board members, I think her name was Mary Ann, caught me in the hallway. She looked nervous, said quietly, "I didn't know she was an owner. I thought she was just the liaison." I didn't say anything. Just nodded, but inside I felt it shift. That was the first pull in the thread. Next day, the email from the journalist landed. He wanted a call, said he'd been tracking ClearVault's expansion into private communities and our documentation fit a pattern. A big one. We talked for 2 hours. He asked sharp questions, knew his stuff. I could hear his pen scratching through the phone. He wanted to see the contracts. We sent him everything. I figured that would take weeks to pan out. It didn't. Within 4 days, the HOA sent out an emergency email announcing a temporary suspension of utility contract discussions due to administrative concerns. They called it internal housekeeping. But we knew, we knew. That same night, Karen showed up at Janet's door, uninvited. She wore that same cream blazer from the board meetings and that creepy "future is bright" pin. Janet called me the second Karen left. Said she didn't threaten her exactly, but she made heavy suggestions that going public would be damaging to community morale. So what did Janet do? She sent the audio recording to the journalist. Yeah, turns out she'd been recording the whole conversation on her phone from her apron pocket. Karen had no idea, and here's where things really got interesting. The next HOA newsletter accidentally sent out an unredacted PDF. Someone screwed up badly, because in the footer of page 4 was an internal memo mentioning anticipated audit risks related to Rosemont Utility Holding LLC and legal contingency fund adjustments. They pulled the file within an hour, but not before I saved it and forwarded it to every single homeowner on the HOA mailing list. I used a burner email and a VPN, sent it with a subject line, "You deserve to know." The next board meeting was standing room only. Half the neighborhood showed up, and Karen, she wasn't there. Rumor was she'd called in indefinitely unavailable due to medical concerns. Sure, by that point, the counterattack wasn't mine anymore. It was ours, and the system she built to silence us, it was starting to crack like glass under a steel boot. It didn't explode all at once. No, it unraveled, bit by bit, like a sweater getting tugged loose, thread first. You don't always get fireworks when a system breaks. Sometimes it's the silence that hits harder. The article dropped first, front page of the Metro Daily Ledger online. Headline bold as hell, HOA president secretly profited from utility deal record show. Underneath was a photo of Karen smiling like a realtor on a billboard, cropped from some HOA event, the kind where everyone's holding plastic champagne flutes and pretending their dues aren't skyrocketing. The article laid it all out. The shell company, the contracts, the board vote, the money trail. It quoted legal analysts, mentioned the possible civil code violations, referenced Oregon's nonprofit disclosure laws. It even included a graph. Janet was so proud of that graph, showing how rates spiked right after Rosemont was brought in. By the time I finished reading, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Neighbors. Reporters. Even my old high school friend from Eugene I hadn't heard from in years messaged me. "Dude, is this your neighborhood?" That afternoon, 2 news vans showed up at the front gate. You'd think we were hosting a press conference. Some guy in a blazer tried to get a statement from the HOA office, but the place was locked up tight. Blinds drawn, parking lot empty. Karen was nowhere to be found. Then came the emergency meeting. The board called it an open community forum to address recent misunderstandings. They held it in the elementary school gym because the clubhouse couldn't fit everyone. And when I say the place was packed, I mean standing room only. Even the janitor stuck around. There was a stage, a mic. 5 folding tables pushed together with the board sitting behind them, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. Marianne, the board member who'd pulled me aside weeks earlier, was the only one who looked halfway human. The rest looked like people watching their own ship go down. Karen wasn't there, of course. They opened the floor for comments. And oh man, did the floodgates burst. One woman brought printouts of her power bills going back 2 years. Another guy, retired military, stood up and asked point blank why no one disclosed financial interests in the vendor contract. Janet brought her binder and calmly walked the room through the conflict of interest clause in the HOA charter. The crowd clapped. Then someone asked the million-dollar question, "Is Karen being removed from the board?" The silence after that felt like gravity itself held its breath. Marianne finally spoke. Her voice cracked at first, but then steadied. As of this morning, Karen Prentice has resigned from her position as board president and has withdrawn from all HOA-related activities pending legal review. You'd think someone announced a national holiday. People cheered. Fikim kikos. I actually saw Tony fist pump. Janet gave me this look like we did it, and even though the rest of the board still tried to spin things, you could tell they were rattled. The crowd had tasted blood, but here's what really sealed it. A man stood up in the back, tall, taut, clean cut, wore jeans and a pullover with a county seal embroidered on the sleeve. Said his name was Rick, from the Office of Community Oversight. He said the board's handling of vendor contracts was under formal review. He said the state had received substantial documentation of financial inconsistencies and had already opened an ethics inquiry. And then he said this: "We are also evaluating whether this HOA remains compliant with nonprofit governance requirements under state law. If it does not, restructuring or external oversight may be recommended." Boom, that was the kill shot. People weren't just clapping anymore, they were recording. Taking photos, sharing clips online. Someone live-streamed it to a neighborhood Facebook group, and within 2 hours, the comment section turned into a bonfire of "I told you so's" and "finally." It didn't feel like revenge? Not exactly. It felt like waking up. The spell Karen had cast over this neighborhood, her speeches, her fake charm, the endless flyers about unity and vision, it all crumbled in real time. She wasn't a leader, she was a parasite with a Range Rover and a god complex. By the next week, her house had a for sale sign in front. Clean white letters. Private listing. Her backyard pool renovation? Left unfinished. No one waved when she left, but everyone watched. Me, I didn't celebrate. Not really. I just stood on my porch that night, lights back on, bills normal again, and finally felt like I could breathe. The story wasn't over. Not yet, but Karen's chapter, that one was closed. Permanently. Things are quieter now. Not perfect, God no, but quieter. The neighborhood feels different, like it finally exhaled after holding its breath for way too long. You can see it in small ways. People wave again. They chat at the mailbox. There's less tension in the air, less of that weird paranoia we all pretended wasn't there. It's not just about electricity bills. It never really was. It was about control. About someone weaponizing authority in a place that was supposed to feel like home. And now it actually kinda does. The HOA didn't implode or vanish overnight. They didn't set fire to the whole thing and start from scratch, like some people wanted. But the board got shaken up. Marianne stepped in as interim president, and say what you will, she at least listens. Real listening, not the fake, I'll take that under advisement. Kind. They opened up the books, posted real financials online. No more cartoon pie charts, no more buried attachments in password-locked folders. They even hired an outside auditor to comb through the last 2 years of contracts. I don't know if anything criminal will come from that, but honestly, that part's out of my hands now. The new energy vendor? Local. Dots. Transparent. Rates are reasonable, and the best part? Nobody's power has mysteriously cut out in months. Karen, I don't know where she went. Rumor has it she moved to Nevada to be closer to her son. Another version says she's laying low in Bend, trying to get into commercial property. Doesn't really matter. She's gone. And if she ever tries to pull this kind of stunt again, there's enough paper trail out there now to light up a courtroom like a Christmas tree. Lily and I? We're good. Better, actually. She said something the other day that stuck with me. We were fixing the back gate, the one the HOA cited me for not aligning with community standards, and she goes, "I'm proud of you. Most people would have just moved." I laughed, told her moving would have been a hell of a lot easier. But she's right. This house, it's not just wood and drywall and a damn gravel driveway they never wanted me to pour. It's ours. It's memories. It's Friday night barbecues and broken sprinklers and the way the porch light flickers when it rains. And I wasn't going to let someone like Karen take that from me. I learned a lot through this whole mess, like how far some people will go when they think no one's watching. Like how easy it is for good people to stay quiet when they feel powerless, and how fast things change when one person finally says, "No, not this time." I wasn't perfect. I was scared half the time, frustrated, exhausted. I second-guessed every move, but I kept going. Because once you see the game for what it is, you can't unsee it, and you sure as hell don't want to be the one still pretending it's fair. Would I do it again? Ask me on a day I'm not chasing down rebate paperwork and unjamming the garbage disposal. But yeah, probably. Because the only thing worse than standing up and getting knocked around is not standing up at all. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone sees something wrong in their own neighborhood, they'll remember some random guy with a binder and a stubborn streak and realize they're not crazy, they're just early.